Welcome to the Default Profitable Podcast. You're listening to the next episode of the podcast, and we're going to talk about what it takes to start, run, and grow a niche business. I'll be talking about some successes, failures, and some startup stories with a real business owner. I'm your host, Matt Nettleton, and today my guest is Ken Carite. Ken, welcome to the show.
Hi, Matt. Good to see you.
Good to see you also. We were talking before we jumped on here. I've probably known you for 25 years, but I haven't seen you for probably 10. Why don't we take 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and introduce yourself and then your company to the people who are listening?
Sure. My name is Ken Carite, and we started a business called PROSHRED Security here in Indianapolis. We are in the information destruction business. And so that means primarily we do paper shredding service. So we have large trucks that do shredding of confidential documents at our clients' locations. But over the years, that's expanded, and we actually do anything that has confidential or risk to our clients. Let me give you an example of what that means. We can either do destruction of uniforms and other things that people don't want to get in the wrong hands. We do electronic computer media. We do, sort of anything that has a risk to an individual or a business entity. And we started the business back in June of 2011.
So why did you start the business? How did you get there?
So I spent 25 years in the corporate world, working from some of the largest to some of the smallest companies around, and had a great career, but always had a desire to run my own business. My dad had his own business for many years as I was growing up. I saw both some of the ups and the downs, but it was always in the back of my mind something I always wanted to do. But as things happen, you start your career after school and kids and mortgages, etc. And it was one of those things where I was just I was afraid to jump off the paycheck every 2 weeks and roll the dice and start my own. I finally got to the point after 25 years in the corporate world where I was able to take that leap. And in my late 40s, we started the business.
So when you say you were able to take that leap and talk about, what was it that made you say, you know what, I'm tired of this steady income with predictable hours. I'd like to be self-employed.
Well, it was a couple of things. So 25 years in working for other people, I sort of began to struggle with motivation and sort of what's it all for. Purpose is probably the best way to describe it. As you know, I married better than my wife did, and so my wife is a 30-year veteran of Roche, and she has been very supportive of me taking this leap, and it certainly gave us the ability from supporting our family to do that as well. But what I made the determination back in 2010 is that I was going to pursue this path, and my wife's full support. And I decided I was going to do one of three things. I was either going to go into a consulting role where I sold my time and talent, or I was going to find an existing business that I could buy, or find a franchise. And the business that I have is actually a franchise. We're one of 30 locations across the U.S. And I chose the franchise because in my late 40s, I wasn't necessarily willing to just, put all the chips in the middle and see what I could do. Having the ability to find something that had a proven track record and had sort of my words, not theirs, but a recipe that I could execute, was what I ended up landing on. And it's turned out to be a really good decision.
So typically people, when they're looking at an opportunity, when they're looking at a business, they're seeing it from one of two ends. One is they just have a passion for the industry. They have a passion for the product. And the other is they see an economic opportunity. It makes sense to them and they think they can make a little bit of money. I guess, which end of the spectrum did you find yourself on?
Definitely more of the latter. But so where I came into it was I'd gotten to the point in my career where I was, solidly middle management. Right? I had as many people that I had to report to that reported to me, and sort of that juggling game just became, the challenge. And not that I expected less people to be waiting on me or responsible for, et cetera, by running my own business, but having the ability to create the culture and to create the environment in which we live in which we worked, was something really important to me. And so the old Peter Drucker quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast, is a really important thing for me and how we go about it. So being able to work in an environment where the culture is something that I wanted to be a part of as opposed to me having to be a part of somebody else's culture was probably as big of a driving force as anything.
And when you say that, it leads me to believe that the shredding of information is kind of secondary to the culture that you work in. Like it could have been a lot of different things. It just happens that it's shredding.
You're 100% accurate. And through the process, when I was going through the determination of what to do, how to do it, and when, I made a list of things that I didn't want to do. And that helped me really narrow down sort of the areas that I would be willing to spend my time and money in trying to do. And so I had very little experience, for example, in business to consumer. Sort of the retail space is not something I have any expertise in. But the vast majority of my career I spent in the IT world. And so information security, being sort of protective of information coming from an IT perspective, certainly lends itself to what we do every day here. And so that's really where it comes from as much as anything.
All right. So 25 years in the corporate world, you open up your own business. What are some of the things that you wish you had known that fateful day that would have made it a little bit easier for you to succeed?
I didn't know we were doing a week-long podcast.
It's going to be an extra episode.
The thing that always strikes me is I didn't know what I didn't know. And that, that's easy to say, and you think you know it when you're going in. I mean, I have an undergraduate business degree and 25 years in successful corporations. And I thought I knew business, but cash flow as a concept versus cash flow as your own money is a dramatically different experience. And so just those kinds of things were really, really interesting to me to learn and recognize. In conversations with other business owners, though, the best analogy I've ever come up with is those of your audience that have the same experience. You can read as many books as you want. You can be around as many children as you could be. But until you have children of your own and become a parent, there's no way to know what it is to be a parent. And that analogy works for me in my business experience. 25 years in some really great corporations and successes and all of the things and business degree, et cetera. But until you actually do it, there's no way of knowing. So what do I wish I knew? I don't know that there's any one thing that comes to mind, except I wish I would have known that I could do it sooner than I did. I wish I would have done it sooner, would probably be the best answer I have.
So when you say you wish you had done it sooner, what's that? What are you trying to say there? What's that mean to you?
Well, if I continue with the parent analogy, you try to be ready to have kids and you do everything you can, right? And you try to, but the only way to do it is to do it. And if I'd have done it 5-10 years sooner, would I have been 5 or 10 years further along now? Probably. But I have 5 or 10 years more experience learning in other environments. So I don't know that there's a one overwhelming thing that says, I wish I'd have known, except I wish I'd have known how much joy and passion and opportunity there was. I would have probably pursued it a lot sooner.
So the other thing that you mentioned there was cash flow as a concept versus cash flow when it's your money. So we're on episode 111, 112, and the number one cited lack of knowledge is business financial acumen. When you say cash flow is a concept versus cash flow is your money, I think that's the practical version of business financial acumen. What was the lesson there? What did you learn as you experienced that, which you described as interesting, but which most people describe as vomit inducing?
There's a little bit of that too. So there is a huge fear component, especially at the age that I started the business. My children were both in school and preparing for college, experiences, saving for the future weddings and all of those things that a parent thinks about. And those things come true. And here I am risking a significant portion of our family's future on something that's important to me. And so that, as much as anything, was the vomit-inducing component of that. And it's the cash flow. It's, looking at a financial statement and seeing revenues exceeding expenses is the basis of a profit and loss statement. But that gives no indication of what the cash flow of the business is. And I didn't fully, completely understand that until it was my own money.
Yeah. And, so obviously I've been a sales trainer for 20 years, but the rule that we teach is you have to make payroll every Friday. And it doesn't matter if you're over for the year, if you're under for Friday.
Well, and we talk all the time around our office that we want this to be a great place to work. But if it were perfect, I wouldn't have to pay everybody to be here, right? They're here for a reason. They have families to support and bills to pay, et cetera. And it's exactly what you said. Making sure that payroll is made each and every time without fail is a huge responsibility when you start talking about other people's families and other people's lives. And I didn't have to worry about that when my paycheck was one of the paychecks that had to be paid,
right?
Working for somebody else. And so that learning and that understanding and internalization of that is probably the biggest learning that I had.
And so if somebody comes to you and says, hey, Ken, I work for a big megacorp and I'm looking at your lifestyle, which I envy. I'd like to open my own business. How do you talk to them about that? What do you say to them?
To me, the biggest question is, what's the why? Why do you want to do it? Financial rewards is the byproduct. And if the focus is on the financial rewards, I got to believe the potential for success is limited, but even the difficulty is dramatically increased. And so for me, it's been, what's the purpose? What's the why? And once I clearly understood the why, then the sleepless nights and all the things that go along with going from point A to point B and starting a business and developing it into something that you dreamed about, all of those things have so much more to do with purpose than it does the financial rewards. And so I would make sure that people spent the time understanding their purpose first before they ever start looking at the business plan and the finances that go along with it.
Would you encourage or discourage them? Do you come at their place from, hey, you really want to do this, but let's talk about how? Or would you say, you know what, I'm not sure it's for you. Let's talk about this.
I don't know if I'd be in a position to say that one way or another for somebody else. My intention would be to share my experience and to say, here's the way I looked at it. And if my, sort of my prescription lenses gives you a little bit clarity, great. But, I would leave that up to the other individuals. Again, it goes back to purpose. I have a very good friend who I consider an advisor during the process of me determining when and how to do this. And he said, and I'll back up a second. He runs a family business, so he's a second generation that's run a business his entire adult life. And he said to this day, he still wakes up in the middle of the night with eyes as big as saucers. And, he has to remind himself the sun's going to come up in the morning and everything's going to be okay. That's just part of the journey. And for someone who's got decades and decades of experience, sharing that with me when I haven't started day one has been a reminder to me here 14 years later. That still occurs. Now, I wouldn't use that as a warning or something to deter somebody from being on the path that I've chosen, but be aware that that's part of the path.
Well, it's interesting. So I think Stephanie Daly early on said, if you're not comfortable waking up at 3 a.m. and thinking about your business, you probably shouldn't be in it. And it really doesn't matter what it is.
That's a very true statement. If I may, I'd add to that. I had a very good friend ask me, maybe 6-8 months after I started the business, how it was going. And, it was a great conversation. And she said, I'll bet your Sunday evenings are different. And it was the first recognition that as an employee, For 25 years, my mentality was, once Friday's over and you sort of shut down Friday at whatever time that is, then your weekend is yours. And that sort of roller coaster ride from, okay, I have the freedom to do what I want to do now, to when Sunday evening rolls around and you have to then start thinking about, again, what your work week is and your travel schedule and whatever else. And my kids now refer to that, they're both in the professional world, they refer to that as the Sunday swirlies. You get those Sunday swirlies. Well, I don't have Sunday swirlies anymore. I haven't had them for 14 years because it never goes off. And so the bigger challenge is, when can you disconnect and actually find your own time? And again, if your audience is people, or is a group of people who may be thinking about starting their own business, my intention is not to scare you away. It's been a great path. But there are challenges, and that's significantly one of the challenges that goes along with it.
Yeah, that being able to disconnect and kind of sit back and think about stuff outside of work it's a nice thing. What about, so, and you mentioned your wife has done well at Roche and is higher up, and how involved has she been in the process?
As far as a day-to-day function, very little. Just, sort of in some minor details, she retired 2 years ago from Roche. And so at that same time, we bought another business. And so she was integral in sort of the integration of that new acquisition into our existing operations. But within the first year, and the agreement was she would do it for a year, she was able to remove herself from day to day. And so she still has some functions in the business, but it's not day to day functions. It never really has. On the other hand, it is absolutely day to day in the relationship, right? I bring it home. And having her as a sounding board, having her as a support and a coach and a, sort of grab me by the shoulders and say, hey, wake up, snap out of it kind of a thing. I rely on her for all of that.
Yeah. I think that's, you can't really separate it from your spouse.
I'm sure there's times where she wished she could have separated me from it, but
yeah. Oh yeah.
You're 100% right.
Yeah. All right. So let's pretend that 2024 Ken could go back and sit down next to 2011 Ken, and you get to say, hey, listen, everything turns out all right. You'll be fine. However, while you can do anything tomorrow, here's the first thing that you need to focus on. What is it that you tell yourself to focus on first when it's starting your business?
My answer, Matt's going to be more about me than it may be others, but I have learned the concept of ready, fire, aim, in that I was so focused on being ready and getting the plan together and making sure I knew all the alternatives and putting all the stress and all the things that go along with that. And I realized that I was getting ready and not pulling the trigger. And the more I was willing, and so I am not comfortable leaping before I look. And so continuing to do some planning and making sure I have a strategy in place and a structure that's going to support what we want to do is important. But at some point in time, pulling the trigger allows so much more motion and so much more learning and so much more progress than planning does. And so learning the ready, fire, aim mentality has been incredibly important to me.
So how detailed was your original startup business plan?
How many tabs on the spreadsheet? Is that what you're asking? It was detailed. It was detailed.
How accurate was it?
Completely inaccurate.
So that's probably behind financial literacy. The number two commonality between the business owners is planning is really important, but the plans that they've come up with have been completely useless.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. So I think part of that's fear, part of that's ignorance, right? I didn't know what I didn't know, but I didn't know what I was getting into. And so wanted to try and accumulate as much knowledge and capability and skill, et cetera, as I could to try and minimize my risk of failure, if you will. But I've learned through many, many, many exercises that sort of getting in there and doing it is so much more productive than sitting around thinking about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a quick 20 minutes. Do you have any somebody that's thinking about starting a business or a new business owner, any other advice you'd give them?
Hmm. Find ways to enjoy the journey. I don't want to get too off the path of a business owners, but um, it, it can be all consuming, and having quality of life is important. Having all of the relationships that have been built to allow an individual or allow me to get to where I've gotten can easily go away if I lose sight of those things. And so, sort of keeping all of that in perspective is probably the best advice I could offer.
Yeah. So, I mean, so many good things, like you got to plan, but you got to execute. And execution is more important than planning. You can fix it later. I mean, understanding that culture is vital. That's another great point. And then the final thing is, you got to enjoy the journey. I mean, the number of people that talk about how great the destination is, but it's a death march with cocktails to get there. I just wouldn't want to live like that. It doesn't appeal to me. So, all right. Well, I think that's a good spot to wrap up. So I'm going to tell everybody, if they want to learn more about Ken or his business, you can find that all over at defaultprofitable.com in the show notes. And if you're listening, there's 3 ways you can help us: leave a review, hit subscribe, or share an episode with somebody. Ken, thanks for being a great guest.
Great seeing you again, Matt. Glad to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. And for our listeners, we'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, stay focused, keep working, stay profitable.